Morning, folks. Morning. How's everybody? Some of you I've recognized in my former lives. Not only did I spend some time at the Department of General Services working in the procurement division, I spent most of my career with the Department of Transportation, with various modal administrations with the department, as well as about half a dozen years as the Chief Procurement Officer for the Department of Transportation. So between DOT and DGS, I've seen a lot of major projects, which this course is really going to concern itself with a lot of these major projects that we get into, some of the high dollar projects or some of the more lengthy projects that go on for years and years and require a lot of management. I think Gary's right to an extent. We don't necessarily do a great job managing our contracts, and I think we've done a better job over the last several years since there's been more of an emphasis on, are we getting our money's worth? You know, we really need to make sure these days that we're getting our money's worth. So we've been paying a lot more attention, I think, and doing a better job of managing some of these contracts. But we're going to go through the course of this class the next several days, whatever the schedule is. And we're going to go over a lot of the situations that may come up as you go managing these type of contracts. I've seen a lot of contracts have problems either in the beginning or in the end. I found a lot of it as a lack of communication, as Gary mentioned, a lack of documentation. So we're going to give you some ideas on how to control some of that, how to manage that, how to build some of these management tools into your contract. I had an example recently where someone says, well, they're not performing. I said, well, you know, what are you doing about it? No, we're not doing anything about it. Why not? Because the contract says there's nothing we can do about it. And oh, hold on, we can do something about it. But the point was there wasn't any corrective actions or any monitoring tools built into the contract itself. But if they're not performing, my goodness, the least we do is not pay them, right? Right? Just like Gary. All right, let's get started here. What do we got? Look, I can read. Oh, this is nice. I got multiple screens to choose from here. It's like I've got. It's like I'm making. There's when you're making a speech, you got those things out there I can read. Prompters. I got teleprompters. Represents DBM procurement and best procurement practices. Illicit analysis and absolute requirements from follows by the agency. Okay, so basically this is what we like to preach. It may or may not be what you guys will do specifically at your individual agencies. Again, that's. You know, DBM said we do it this way. Well, it's up to you guys. You still make the call back at home. But we like to try to give you what we believe is our best practices about how to go through some of these things. Table of contents. All right, what do we got here? The major emphasis is going to be on, again, the larger contracts. Again, the ones that are millions of dollars and last years and years. These tend to be more difficult. They tend to have more moving parts. They tend to have more people involved. They tend to be of a lot more priority. They tend to be very expensive. I mean, you need to watch very closely how some of these are being performed. This isn't rocket science, folks. When someone comes and fixes your roof on your house, you want to make sure they do a good job, right? So you keep an eye on them and you make sure things are done. Did they do everything they were supposed to do? Yes. Did they clean up their mess when they were done? Yes. So this is the kind of stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to give you ideas and focus on these big picture items, but again, a lot of these tools can be applied to anything when it talks about just managing performance of a contract. It really concerns the successful completion. At the end of the day, you know, what's the magic words? On time, on budget, on schedule. We're going to talk specifically about state projects. Okay. We're going to focus on the successful completion of these projects. Where am I going? Is that the next one? Is that the next one? My own schedule? Am I right? This thing can get away from me sometimes. I wasn't ready for this morning. All right, this is the definition. The discipline of planning, organizing, securing, and managing resources to bring about the successful completion of specific project goals and objectives. Okay? What's your goal? What's your objective? Let's be specific. And it goes through 5 stages. Initiation, planning, executing, controlling, and closing. Okay? And that definition comes from the Project Management Institute. Makes sense, right? May or may not involve a contract. 9 times out of 10 they will. However, there are some projects that have same management emphasis and same management techniques that can be done by state employees. Okay? But mostly we'll be talking about contracts. All right. Again, even if it's its own workforce, but for a project, at least some work must be done by the organization's own workforce. Select a contractor, make decisions, and paying invoices. We're going to talk a lot in one of these days about paying invoices. We're going to talk about ensuring that we're getting the proper payment for performance. I'm going to read off my book. That might be a little bit better for me. The majority of the project activities are not performed by own employees. They're more involved with the project management than just managing a single contract. Same concept here. What is that? Make that go away. Thank you. Thank you for your able assistance. All right. What do we got here? Some projects are simple, obviously, and some projects are much more complex. Some of us remember the first time they sent, I'm not that old, but some of us do remember that the project of sending a man to the moon. President Kennedy said, we'll put a man on the moon, right? Thousands of NASA employees were involved. There are thousands of individual contracts. There are hundreds of contractors involved, and there is billions of dollars involved. And the project management in this regard concerned melding all these resources together to accomplish what? The final objective, which was to put a man on the moon. So that was a project that they'd been developing towards that, but they'd never actually put somebody on the moon. Obviously that was very complex, very expensive, lots of people involved. But the techniques we'll talk about today can apply to something just like that. How do I make it? How are we doing so far? Doing pretty good, all right, so far? How you feeling, Joel? All right. Yeah, we're not, we don't have projects of that magnitude. I think some of us in our minds may think we have projects of that magnitude, and we probably have projects that are that difficult in our minds of that magnitude. But there are a lot of other projects that we've worked on, cleaning up the bay, preparing for BRAC, the base realignment and closing activities, and of course, the Department of Transportation has huge projects, a lot of capital projects, Intercounty Connector, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. The Stadium Authority got those stadiums built. The Transit Administration has built light rail systems and subway systems, and there are talk about further development of those projects. So there come of examples of some of the major projects the state has taken on. Before I left DGS, one of the things we awarded was a construction project for a brand new courthouse down in Rockville. I presume that's progressing nicely. Very good, very good. So, next. Large or small, they need to be managed similarly because, again, there are lots of moving pieces that you need to ensure flow cohesively. So, we focus on the accomplishment of the overall objective of the project. That's the project management. Contract management focuses on the accomplishment of the objectives of a specific contract. A little bit different. You can have multiple contracts underneath a single project. If the project is to renovate a certain portion of the Maryland Port Administration for a brand new tenant, that's the project. The contracts could entail someone doing parking lots, someone doing construction of garages. So you could have multiple contractors under a single project. So while the project management may be looking at all of it, the contract management focuses specifically on the individual contracts that may be going on underneath the overall umbrella project. Primary focus is how to manage contracts awarded by the state. Project management. So we're going to focus on contract management with a little bit of project management thrown in there. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, obviously, but we're going to focus on the contracts. A contractor under a state contract may be prevented or hindering from achieving the desired results of the state contract by, okay, what's the reasons? There are lots of reasons why things go wrong, right? Lack of performance by us, lack of performance by them, failure of the state's personnel to make decisions, or maybe pay bills or pay them timely. These are all elements of project management, and accordingly, to properly discuss contract management is necessary to at least minimally discuss project management. There's some overlapping ideas here. Next. This class focuses on projects that involve a contract obtained by the state through a procurement process. Normally, the majority of our contracts are procured through a competitive basis. But there are other, lesser degree also for contracts awarded by other than competitive means. Emergencies, sole sources, regardless of the methodology, you still have to manage the contract, okay? So the focus of the class is how to manage major contracts within the context of our procurement regulations and our procurement laws. I'm talking about competitive procurements. Looking at managing competitively awarded state contracts from a high-level perspective. So we're going to look at things from the top down, the 10,000-foot view, as Joel says. There are two distinct management stages. We're going to plan to manage that contract, and then we're going to manage the contract. Okay? Within each of these two stages, there are also two sub-stages. I mean, that pretty much split it in half, right? We're going to figure out how we're going to manage this contract. We're going to identify all the things we're going to need to do to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. All right, we'll plan all that. We'll get our checklist down, whatever it is we're going to use, all of our tools to manage the contract. We'll figure out what they are, and then we'll go manage it. All right, what do we got here? Planning. Determining the contract management requirements. What kind of tools will we need in our toolbox to make sure that they're doing their work, right? A lot of these are covered in the planning class. And making changes to those requirements during the procure phase. Sometimes we may figure out we might want to do something in addition to what we've already thought we might, what we have already planned to do. So at that point, we'll need to make some changes. So we'll identify that in the procure stage when we go through actually procuring the contract to obtain the vendor. Again, what do we need to put in the toolbox to make sure we can manage this contract? And then, let's manage it. Day-to-day management of the contract, and if necessary, modifying the contract if it's determined that that would enhance the management under different conditions. So it's not all cast in stone. Sometimes we'll need to make some adjustments to our management plan, our contract plan as we go along. All right? What's next? I don't know. What's next? Gotcha, babe. I'm with you. Any contract modification would have to be determined to be within the scope of the contract and require an agreement of the contract or a change order. So the previous slide talked about, okay, if we need to make any changes to our contract management methodology, we will need to do that through a formal modification. Again, any modification has to be within the scope, and that will either be through a change order or a contract amendment. If we're going to change the rules and how we're managing their performance, other than what we told them originally, then we'll need to do that formally. Okay? You didn't tell me that. You can't do that to me. That's not in the contract. All right? So if we're going to make changes in how we're going to manage these folks, make sure we get that into the agreement. Gary, what are you doing to me? Mr. Goldberg. That big picture. Yes? What? The big picture. What is the big picture? I don't know. Let's find out. This first statement kind of immediately made me think of my kids. Under ideal circumstances, contracts wouldn't need to be managed. You know, if they were good kids, I wouldn't have to manage them the way I have to. Under ideal circumstances, go forth and do your job and we'll never bother you, right? Which is kind of the way Joel treats us at DBM. We could write unambiguous specifications and contracts that clearly stated what was to be accomplished and make no changes in what was to be provided during the term of the contract. Now this happens. If I order 40 2x4s and the guy shows up and gives me 40 2x4s, sounds like a pretty easy contract to manage, right? In its most simplest of examples, right? 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 Give me another simple example. Simple man. They're very easy. I mean,
I'll give you a good example.
Go ahead.
We put out a.
Oh.
We put out a solicitation to implement a whole new vital record system. And we go through agonizing pains to make sure that we have the right contractor, we have the right specifications, we have the right timetable for implementation,
and
we have the right payment schedule.
Anything else?
And that's what we expect to happen.
Did it?
No.
So what's the moral of your story?
They're not all 2x4s.
That's right, and we're going to not talk about the 2x4s. But it's not all gloom and despair. Sometimes it's fairly simple. Sometimes it's fairly obvious. And a lot of times it ain't. So, maybe we get it right. And the contractor performs rather smoothly with no problems. Not normally the case and not the situations we're going to talk about through this class. A quality vendor would win the award and perform exactly as required by the contract. That does happen. That does happen. Sometimes it takes a lot of care and feeding, a lot of hand-holding, sometimes lesser degrees of that, but sometimes that does happen, folks. We occasionally do get it right. Ideal circumstances rarely happen. Now let me bring you down, okay? Concerning state agencies, to the varying degrees, state agencies may not know what they want. How many times have they walked in and said, you know, I really need something, but I'm not quite sure how to get it? And then you start trying to mold together some kind of a specification and say, I think this is what we want. They may know the high-level objectives, but not the details of how to achieve those objectives. A lot of times we procurement folks have to interpret what program or operational people want and craft some sort of a specification and hope through communication and dialogue you get them what they actually needed. And in planning class, we talk about the difference of what you actually need versus what you think you want. So we're not going to bore you with that today. This is particularly true if something is being procured for the first time. Was your example for the first time? Have they done something like that before?
Yeah.
Nah, forget it then. Agency personnel may not be skilled, this is a fact, in writing specifications or especially evaluated procurements that minimize the need for detailed specifications. So sometimes a lot of the folks that we rely on to give us this information, tell me what you need, they're not technical writers, they're operations folks. They're not scope of work writers, or they're not specification writers. They're people that are working out in the fields, or they're operations folks. They've got their other things to worry about. I know what I need. Can I write it for you? Can I explain it to you? I'll try. But they're not experts at this. I mean, there's a lot of consulting firms and engineering firms who have people that do nothing but this kind of stuff, that develop specifications and scopes of work on a professional level. A lot of times it's just an extra duty that someone has to perform, begrudgingly sometimes. Or we'll look and see, what did we do last time? We'll dust that off. That seemed to work. Let's try that again. That's a little easier for us to do. But if we've never done it before, to create it from scratch, sometimes we can have some problems with that. Okay? What's next? Sometimes we may not figure out exactly what we want. That's the first part. Now, if we're doing a proposal, we have to evaluate the proposals, right? Sometimes we can have problems with that. Sometimes the agency personnel are not skilled in conducting evaluated procurements. They don't quite understand how to get the best deal or how to incorporate the winning offer's deal into the contractual requirements. We will spend another class talking about competitive sealed procurements. But what we have found over time is some of the people who make the decisions based on these proposals that come in may not be the best folks to be making those kinds of decisions. And again, that's not what they do full time anyway. So we need to do a better job of training people how to conduct evaluated procurements to ensure that you're getting that best deal at the end of the day. We've found that to be true. Things change over time. Funding may or may not be available and or be, as we've seen lately, reduced. They've come to us numerous times over the last several years and say, we no longer have this much money, we have this much money, make some changes accordingly. That may affect your management of that contract.
One comment about that is that we have a mandate that we must now, when we have a contract renewal or modification coming up, we must go to the contractor and say, how about reducing your price? That's the contract manager's responsibility. Takes a little bit of chutzpah, a little
savvy.
bit of guts, a little bit of savvy, a little bit of forwardness to try to get the reasoning, some reasoning behind that. You know, state's in bad shape. Well, everybody knows that. But rates haven't gone up in your particular area. We know the labor costs. We think that there's some room here. And we don't want to go out and, remember, we're asking that question 6 months at least, maybe more, before the contract expires. And maybe we also have that time ability with a modification. But if we don't renew an option, we have to go out and do another procurement. Well, that leaves the vendor exposed, whose option could be renewed, and maybe he just wants to have his renewal and give up a few percentage points to satisfy the state. So, contract manager responsibility.
Question.
Yes.
The contract manager that you're referencing, is that procurement contract manager, or like in my case, the maintenance chief who's writing the specs and managing the contract?
The one who has direct contact with the vendor.
That would be, because I would have thought that would have been the function of the procurement department. Procurement officer.
We have had the program or the contract manager is the one that we expect to go and have that conversation.
Okay. Funding may be an issue, which may lead to a change in how you manage your contract, or a lot of times we've seen some of these longer term contracts, the agencies may change. Someone may retire, personnel may change, the agency may be reorganized. That may affect how well we manage the contract. You know, Gary's managing the contract, he leaves, I inherit that responsibility, I ain't got time for that. How they doing? I don't know, I guess they're doing fine, we're paying the bills. So things change. That may have an effect on how we manage our contract as well. Things change over time. Agency personnel involved in a contract, whether it's the contract manager, procurement officer, or the attorney, each may tweak how the contract is performed and have a different interpretation. Some may care more, some may care less. Some may have more knowledge of the contract, some may have less, some may have more interest, some may not even care. Or they just may say, look, I don't have time for this. You know, Gary had lots of time. I don't have time for this. So if the personnel change, that may have an effect on how the contract's managed. Normally not a positive change, but that's not always the case. There may have been a situation where, and this can happen with a competitive sealed procurement, whether it's a bid or a proposal, we ended up with the wrong vendor. Now, wrong may mean a lot of things, but they're just not working out. Let's leave it at that. And we'll call them the wrong vendor. How did we get there? Well, maybe we went with the extreme low bid. It didn't smell right to begin with, and guess what? They couldn't perform. The bid was just too low. Well, we awarded to the highest technically ranked offer with not enough emphasis on obtaining a vendor that is affordable over the entire term of the contract. Yeah, this guy's doing a great job, but he's bleeding my budget dry. We're not going to have enough money in the bank to finish the project because this guy's too expensive. Whatever's going on behind me, this is Gary's fault. If there's another downturn in the economy, if our situation doesn't get much better here on the state level, if we have to further continue to reduce operating costs, which have an effect on our contracts, all of this may affect vendor performance. We always stress it's so important to get the right one out of the gate. Selecting a wrong vendor, a lot of times you'll know it right away, but a lot of times you'll be stuck with them and it becomes a management headache. Remember, the ideal situation rarely happens, right? How about this wrong vendor? More examples. Maybe the responsibility of the bidder or offer may not have fully been vetted. You think they're good, you think they can finish up, they come back to you 8 months into the project and say, hey, guess what, we're going broke. You know, we've overextended this contract, or we've underbid this contract. Or, you know, their parent company's gone broke, whatever. We haven't looked further enough into the actual ability of the contractor to perform fully and completely. Their integrity, their reliability. There may not have been a thorough understanding of exactly what a vendor was offering to do. Again, it goes back to people who don't quite understand how to evaluate proposals. Well, we thought they were giving us this, but it ended up to be that, and that's not what we really wanted. But I guess if we'd have gone back and asked some questions, we would have understood that at the time. So ensuring that you get the right people making those kind of decisions will help eliminate that bullet anyway. During the proposal process, you gain a thorough understanding of exactly what it is we want and what it is this guy's trying to sell you, okay? So there shouldn't be an understanding months later about what it is that's being performed or not being performed. A lot of those techniques are talked about in our competitive sealed proposal class. Who put this book together? All right, what's next? How we doing? Everybody okay? Everybody all right? Doing okay? Yes, sir.
In the earlier class, one of the things that I learned that was a little bit more value was the importance of the pre-bid conference, to actually go through the spec in detail and get discussions about each line item.
Absolutely.
Really get clarification.
Yeah, that's a good point. Whether it's a bid or proposal, again, you've got the opportunity to have a pre-bid or pre-proposal conference. And during those conferences, the main emphasis, look, you need to understand what we want, and you need to understand how to get it to us, okay? Whether it's the submittal information or just an understanding of what the project itself entails. And in proposals, obviously you want to hold discussions, oral presentations, and discussions with the offers as well to further gain the understanding of what it is exactly this guy's trying to sell me versus what it is exactly I need. So that's a good point. So there is a value to those. Yes. All right, what's next? We're going to dwell on the ideal rarely happens for a while here. Concerning contractors, vendors may overstate or underestimate their capability to perform. Sometimes they bite off more than they can chew. I had a gentleman I used to work with, was an engineer who used to work in sales, and I always asked him, Bill, what's the most important thing from a sales perspective? And he would say to me very simply that a contractor should never overextend themselves. They should always know what they can handle and bid accordingly. I thought that was good information, because sometimes if they get too aggressive, they may overestimate, underestimate, end up coming back to you months later and saying, look, we got problems. We're not going to be able to pull this off. Now, whether that's deliberate on their attempt to buy the business, as we like to say, get their foot in the door, I'll make it up later with some change orders. I've got a method to my madness, right? Or maybe they just didn't understand. okay, what that actual performance was going to entail. They may underestimate the cost of performance and overestimate the profit. Suddenly they're not making as much as they thought they were. Heck, next thing you know, they're not making any money at all. Now I'm bleeding on this contract. This isn't good. Where's my estimator at? I need to talk to that guy who put my bid together, right? They may anticipate more usage on indefinite quantity contracts than materializes. Sometimes we'll use more than we say they would. Sometimes we'll not use as much as we say they would in those indefinite quantity contracts. That's why we really want to emphasis on those, that you try to give them a decent idea of what it is you're going to be buying. Let me give you an example real quick about someone who overestimated or underestimated, however you want, whichever side you're looking at on a contract. I won't go into any details, but this is a pretty extensive contract. The incumbent had been doing the job for a long time. They went through a competitive process. They selected a new vendor. They did not go thoroughly look at the responsibility of this vendor, the couple slides earlier. Did they do their homework to say, does this guy got the wherewithal to make this happen? Now, I inherited this contract, so it's easy for me to second guess on what they should and shouldn't have done. But one of the things I certainly would have looked further at was their ability to perform, because there was going to be a lot of capital expense right up front, okay? And there was a lot of labor costs, a lot of operating costs involved. So if they'd cut their profit margin too small, they were going to start going belly up real soon. Again, hindsight's 20/20, but it surely happened. The contractor got in. It was a very important service. It was an operating function. It was a service that had to be performed. The contractor got in. They seemed to do okay. 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, they started struggling. A couple months, within a matter of months, they came back to us and said, look, we've got problems. Long story short, the state ended up inheriting a lot of the responsibilities on this contractor. We had to do an emergency contract to replace this contractor. Went back to the incumbent who had been performing the services through an emergency procurement. And if someone had done their homework up front, they would have realized that this contractor probably wasn't going to make this happen due to the price that he bid, the expenses that were involved, and the return that he was expecting. So we need to do our homework to ensure we get the right vendor, because that caused a lot of consternation on the state side. It cost us a lot of expense. We ended up paying the guy's bills for him at one point just to keep him floating while we got another procurement in place. So pays to get the right vendor, because if you don't, it's a real headache. Where we at, Gary? Things about contractors change. A contractor may change through a merger or an acquisition. What happens then? The parent may or may not be, the new parent may or may not be as interested in this contract as the former contractor was, okay? When things like that happen, you need to ensure that players don't change, that ideas don't change, that methodologies don't change, that management tools don't change. Okay, just because somebody else now buys the company doesn't mean that my rules have changed. The contractor may change its business model or seek to. Okay, the parent has bought the company. They're no longer interested in this particular line of work. So what do they want to do? Maybe they want to get out of the business. Maybe they're trying to sell it. Maybe they don't want to do an exercise. Maybe, no, we're not interested. We don't even want to renew this contract when the time comes up. They may look at it the other side. They say, look, we can squeeze a lot more money out of this contract if we wanted to. Let's try to really maximize the profits on this. Or they can say, we're just not that interested in this because we've got other things that are more important, and they'll de-emphasize the resources. Well, we're not going to have this guy work on the project anymore, someone else is. So you have to look at the effect that any of that may cost on your performance and on the management of the contract. I mean, things change. A lot of the stuff we're talking about now, when we talk about how to plan to manage the contract, these are issues we're going to try to talk about that we include. All right, so if they change their personnel, do we have a clause in our contract that talks about that? Yeah, it does. Okay, so we've got some say in that. So we'll talk about the tools that are going to address these things later on. Their personnel may change. They can guarantee you, they can promise you that I will be on the contract for the life of the contract. Things happen. We know that no one can guarantee that someone's going to be here 5 years from now doing that particular function. Okay, I can't guarantee that. So let's build in some tools to fix that in case something happens. Contractor personnel may change and may have their own, okay, so contract personnel changes. What happens then? Again, same situation we talked about before. Lack of interest, different interpretations, doesn't understand, lack of knowledge, lack of stature within the firm or the organization. Maybe this is beneath them, something they're not going to deal with. Keep in mind that these things do happen. These are the tools that we want to kind of build into the toolbox. What else? Other contractors may not perform properly, affecting the ability of contractors dependent on their output. So what happens if the prime contractor is having trouble with one of his subcontractors, maybe? That may have an effect on the schedule and on the cost, right? So it may not be the particular contractor, but another contractor that we're dealing with. Or maybe there are multiple contractors on the site, and maybe I need to wait for the roofer to get done before I can come in there and lay the floor. Well, maybe the roofer's running late. There's problems with the roofer. Now he's affecting my schedule. Now he's affecting my ability to perform. Again, when you got these big projects with a lot of moving pieces, you got to hope everybody's working harmoniously and everything's going smoothly. Okay? Did you get a packet? Did you get one of these? Sorry about that. Pardon that interruption. Where are we at? Equipment parts may cease to be available. I'd have to wonder why you asked for that to begin with. That may or may not, that sometimes may happen, I guess, not as much as often, because there's a lot of compatible machineries these days and compatible equipments these days. And hopefully your specification would be built about some sort of a piece of equipment that may or may not cease to be available. Bless you. Maybe software programs are no longer supported. I've found that happening in the state quite often in my 30 years of experience. What do you mean we no longer support that system? You guys haven't upgraded that yet? A shortage of skilled labor, whether on their side or our side, okay? And key personnel may leave who may or may not be adequately replaced. All these things are going on, right? I mean, nothing happens smoothly. What else? There may be a flood, a fire, a natural disaster. It may snow 36 inches, right? All of these things may have an impact on their ability to perform, and therefore your management techniques have to change. Obviously, if there's conditions that prohibit them from getting on the job site or performing, you're going to have to deal with those contingencies. There's always something new, right? You ask for this, let me try to sell you something new. New technologies and methodologies are always being introduced, so that's something else that may change how we're thinking about things. The likelihood that something will change or go amiss sometime during the contract term increases the longer the contract goes on and the more items there are to deliver. It's pretty simple here. The longer they're on the job, the more likelihood something's going to go wrong. The more items that need to be involved, the more pieces of the puzzle that are involved, more likely something's going to go wrong. If I'm just ordering lumber, there's not a whole lot to it, right? All right. No matter what the situation, it does not benefit the state or state personnel to throw up their hands and say, there's nothing I can do about it. I think we're beyond this mentality now. In fact, I like it when my contract managers not always, they'll say, what can I do about it? They're not going to say, oh, well, it's the state's money. I say, if that was your money, you wouldn't act like that. I got them coming to me now saying, what am I going to do about this? Look what this guy did. Look what they did. I'm not paying them. Whatever it is. I mean, we don't take this attitude anymore. We can't afford to take that attitude anymore. Solution is to manage the state contracts and no matter what the situation, try to ensure the best outcome for the state. Okay? It is our money. Darn it. Full value for payments to the contractor and continuation of essential services. That's what's most important to us. That's our best outcome, all right? There is a natural tendency for people to slack off if they feel no one is watching or no one simply cares. I think that can be applied to state employees as well as our contractors, but if the contractor's out there going through the motions, he's sweeping the floor and he's emptying the trash cans and he's cleaning out the sinks and he's washing the mirrors, but nobody's watching him, or nobody even bothers to care to ask, hey, how you doing? And next thing you know, he says, I don't need to wash them things today. Nobody cares anyway, right? It doesn't matter. They haven't looked in this bathroom for 6 weeks. Why should I worry about cleaning the mirrors today? Okay?
Mark, one comment. The first tip-off, the very first tip-off, is when there's a deliverable and you don't ask for it at the due date, or they don't give it to you by the due date. Oh, okay, I'm going to wait another week. I'm going on vacation. Contractor was in. He said he's going to get it to me, in 3 days. He had a problem coordinating some information that was required. Yeah. Those are reasonable types of words. And maybe the contract monitor would allow another week to go by. But guess what? They don't deliver in that week. And then you hear the excuse again. And pretty soon, you don't have that deliverable, and it's time for the next deliverable. Well, what good's the next one if they're based upon each other? So the idea is that if there is a deliverable date, you have to have a deliverable, whether it's you or a coworker, if you're not going to be there, or it's a certified letter the day after it was due, something that tells the vendor, I'm watching this, I know what's expected, shape up, or we're going to have our alternative remedy conversation.
Playing down to the expectations is what the slide says. But your point's well taken. If they're supposed to do something on a certain date and time, and they don't do it, and you don't say, hey, you didn't do this by the certain date and time, suddenly they say, hey, I don't have to do it. I don't have to do this by a certain date and time. Suddenly it means nothing. Again, I immediately start thinking about my kids. If they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and you know they didn't do it, and you let them get away with it, how can you expect them to do it again on time if you've let them get away with it in the first place? It's the same thing with these contractors. They're like bad children, I think.
Before you turn that one, Mark.
No, I can't. I'm going to turn it.
The third bullet needs to be emphasized. So the lack of contract management may become a self-fulfilling prophecy, even for a vendor that originally intended to fully perform. And I think most of our vendors are that. They do intend to fully perform.
I think they've
manage it.
Yeah, I think they've all got good intention. I wouldn't say they all do, but I think the majority of them have good intention. But again, as things change on their side, okay, and they realize the state's not quite as attentive as they said they were going to be, the combination of some of these things may lead to a deterioration of performance. Where are we at? Can I go now, sir?
Yes.
The cat's away, the mice will play. That doesn't happen. All right. Due to any of the foregoing or a host of other circumstances, what was anticipated to occur or not occur when the contract was awarded may change. All right? That's rather obvious. When they need to change, the management is going to intensify. Because at that point, something's changed. Now, we need to make sure we get back on focus and meet our objective, which is what? The successful completion of the project. So suddenly, my management activities need to turn up a little bit because I've got something different than what I thought I had before. Okay? This may or may not be a big issue. Okay? But it's going to require someone paying a little bit closer attention because there has been a change. Who is that person? Raise your hand. Who is that person? The right person. The first step in contract management should be to pick the right person to be the contract manager. We have a contract manager questionnaire handout, and we talked about this in the overview and planning class. I guess we'll get to that handout later on in the program. Let's talk about this right person. Most of the time, these contract managers are state personnel. Were they hired to do such a thing? I don't know. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. In construction, at DGS and at DOT, we would hire outside firms with professionals to manage our construction contracts. Now, we'd have state personnel on the job as well, managing the contract managers, but we didn't have the expertise in a lot of cases to manage those construction contracts. We didn't have the right person. So we'd go hire the right person, and then we'd manage the right person, okay? So let's talk about this right person. They should have skills and knowledge of the contract subject. Subject matter experts, at least show me some interest, okay? Be effective, able to effectively communicate. Interpersonnel skills, verbal and written communication. They are the front line, they are the face between your agency and the contractor. They can be the good cop, they can be the bad cop. They need to be able to articulate. They need to be able to document, okay? There are skills that they have to have, they should have. Detail-oriented. Be able to organize and prioritize, particularly these large projects where you got lots of moving pieces. Have time. Dedicate the time. And have sufficient stature within the agency to be able to make decisions, interpretations, commitments, okay? I hear what you're saying, Mr. Contractor, but I'm not the one who can make that decision. I need to go talk to somebody. We might get back to you today. We might get back to you next week. They should have some ability to call the shots, okay? These are all good skills that this individual may have. Have the proper time. That's the one I got kind of stuck on for a minute because, a lot of times I've found through the years that people inherit this function. And if they don't have the time to dedicate, that will affect their ability to manage and the contractor's ability to perform, what he can get away with, right? He or she, I guess. The contract manager should be selected first so that they can participate in the planning process and the procurement process. We have often said, if we're going to hand this to you at the end of the day, you need to be involved from day one so you can have input into the decisions that are made that will result in the contractor that you're going to be intimately working with, all right? Too often we go and say, okay, here's your contract, here's your contractor, and you're like, well, this is fine, but I would have loved to have had some input into how we chose to plan to manage this contract and how we selected this particular contract. So we don't stress this enough. They've got to be involved from the get-go. And normally they are. And this will allow their expertise and personal preferences to be incorporated into the planning and into the procurement phases. It will help help enhance the documents, help select the right vendor, the better understanding of the offers and the bids. Since they're the subject people, they know what these people are trying to tell us, what they're trying to sell us, what we do want, what we don't want. And they're the ones to best project a positive image of the state, other than the procurement officer. If there is a change in the contract managed during the term of a contract, and a replacement contract manager should have the same characteristics as the original one. Maybe better. Who knows? As contractors' personnel may change, certainly our personnel may change as well. Hopefully, the substitute or the new manager has the same traits and characteristics, resources that the previous one had. And if you dumb it down, this next one kind of talks about, Gary was managing the contract. Now we're going to let the clerk at the front desk manage the contract. Not to say anything wrong about the clerk at the front desk, but if you de-emphasize that, the contractor may view that as, maybe they're just not as interested in this as they once were. Okay, so be careful how that works. Bless you. There should be succession planning or backup personnel for the management of major state contracts. I've seen this. when you've got these big projects that you know are going to go on for a couple years. In fact, I was involved in one project where we knew that the gentleman who was involved was going to retire somewhere through the course of the project. So we had to plan for a backup in that case. In case the current contract manager leaves, retires, whatever, or temporarily can't manage the contract, someone else in the agency should be ready to step in and manage. If it's that important, you'll have that backup on deck ready to go, okay? Someone should be designated as an understudy or a backup for each major contract, appropriate for the contract at issue, and again, have the sufficient knowledge of the contract, knowledge of the vendor's performance, that there isn't any serious drop-off in contract oversight or contractor performance if the regular contract manager is unable to perform. We want to avoid the problems on the next slide, so let's see what the next slide has to say. Here are our problems. Recipe for subpar contract performance. If a contract manager leaves or is unavailable and there is not proper succession planning and the best qualified personnel are assigned to other duties so that the person left to inherit the role of contract manager is last man standing. Who's going to manage this contract? Okay, you manage the contract. You may not have any idea what it's about. You may not have the skills, the knowledge. You don't have the time. You don't have the interest. And I'm just the clerk at the front desk, right? So these are things we want to try to avoid. Proper planning will allow you to avoid those. How we doing? We gonna take a break? When we taking a break? 10:30? 10:30. Is that okay? Somebody let me know when it's 10:30. Please. The contract manager is the frontline contact with the contractor. So what do we want them to do? They're our salesperson, right? We want them to project a positive image. The person selected to manage and the extent of the involvement of that person in the procurement process conveys a message to the bidders and the offers. It lets them know, look, I got my contract manager involved from day one. When you go to the pre-proposal conference and you introduce the contract manager, those in the audience realize, hey, they're serious about how this thing's to be managed. Okay? If the contract manager participates in those pre-proposal conference and the evaluation committee, again, it conveys that the message of the contract is important not only to us, but to the vendor as well, provided the appropriate person is the contract manager. We'll always leave you with that. The right person, okay? Get them involved. It lets the agency know it's important to us. And some of these big ticket items, this happens naturally. The agencies have been there before in a lot of these things. They realize the importance of having the contract manager involved from the front, and they realize the message that sends to everybody. The procurement people, the engineering people, the operations people. Everybody knows that, look, Gary's managing this. You know, we got the bulldog on this. We're going to be fine. Right there. The stature of the contract manager should be enhanced in the eyes of the vendor by having the appropriate person and having them actively involved in the procurement process. Again, showing them that we're involved, letting them know who's out there. Doing this sets the stage from the very beginning for the contractor to view proper contract performance as a firm expectation. I think that's well written, Joel. I like that. A firm expectation. Possibly not doing so conveys the opposite message. Firm expectation. Let there be no misunderstanding. We'll have the following items delivering on the following days at the following location. If not, the following will happen. Okay? It's just the state. They're not serious. They don't really mean it. That's just DHMH. They don't mean it. Keep on a roll. Once a positive image is initially established, it must be maintained and reinforced by the contract manager. Follow through with the lead role. You're the man in charge. You're the person in charge. These are my expectations. This is what you shall be doing. And this is what I shall be doing, okay? Ensuring the agency does all it is required. I'm going to hold up mine to the bargain. You hold up your end of the bargain as well, right? And we're going to provide the contractor with an updated contract compliance checklist or a performance checklist. Sometimes we'll go through the details of saying, here are the 10 things you need to do and when you need to do them. Okay? Let's all agree to those today, and they'll go forth on that. A lot of this stuff's built into the specification, or it's built into the proposal, schedules. A lot of these things are already built in. We just need to make sure that we comply. Speaking of compliance, later in the class, it is recommended that a contract compliance checklist be included as an attachment to the solicitation or to the contract to convey to the vendors that a process is already in place to manage the contract. Again, this is something already agreed upon. You saw it in the solicitation. Didn't have any problems with it then. It incorporated into the contract. You signed off on it then. Initiation kickoff meeting. Okay, here's the checklist. Any issues with the checklist? No, I've been fully aware of this checklist since I first got the bid or proposal months ago. And I know your contract manager's been involved in this the whole time. I understand the importance of this checklist and will comply. Hey, that's great. Let's see if that really happens. Because of amendments to the solicitation or to incorporate contractor commitments, it may be necessary to revise this checklist. This can be done solely on your part or may be done with some input of the vendor. But there are situations where the checklist may need to be changed. Doing this promptly continues the message that the contract manager will be proactive and conscientious. That's a good thing. We see this coming. We know one of the requirements of the checklist is going to change. We're going to be out front, and we'll let you know in 30 days. Checklist item 9 is going to be amended to read as follows. You know what I mean? Really be out on top of this. Keep on a roll, as we said. Where we at? Although the contract managers convey a solid image of professionalism and high expectations, I think that goes without saying, they should also develop a good working relationship with the contractor and their counterparts and other appropriate contract personnel. No contract can or should completely detail every situation that might occur during the life of the contract. You don't know it all. You got to develop this rapport so as things do change, it can be handled agreeably, okay? I think I would just have to say I have concerns when contract managers become too comfortable with their contractors. I understand developing a good rapport, but let's not get too cozy, okay? Many aspects of the day-to-day performance of a contract need to be worked out. We're going to work the bugs out. Got a little turbulence up front. A good rapport, good understanding, good relationship between the two parties, the two principals of the two parties, our contract manager, their point of contact. It'll make a lot of this go very easier. This normally would happen in the initial part of the contract, particularly if it's someone who's inherited something contracted for the first time. It's really nice if you can work these things out and get on with a successful project. You don't want to start bickering back and forth from the day one. The carrot versus the stick approach. Understanding when unusual circumstances, especially ones beyond the contractor's control, temporarily hamper their performance. Okay, you didn't meet the due date the first time. I'll give you till tomorrow. They comply. Okay, that's good. But we have our limitations here as well, depending on the nature of the project. You may or may not have the luxury of letting them get away with missing a date. Sometimes you do need to drop the hammer right away. Depends on what it is. But we like to think it's a little bit easier if you can start out with a good relationship. I talked to a contractor who used to do a lot of work for a particular agency, and this other contractor had predominantly getting all the business now. And I thought to myself, what's that about? And we were only getting a single response. So I called the old contractor up one day out of curiosity, and I said, why aren't you interested in this work anymore? And he said very matter-of-factly, I can't stand your contract manager. I'm not going to subject my people to this guy anymore. he ends up nickel and diming me to death. So here was a vendor who made a conscious decision not even to participate in the procurement process, fearing the contract manager they'd have to work with on the other end. And in his opinion, the person was unreasonable. So the right person may have an effect in a lot of ways, not just performance, but the actual competition of the contract.
And let me just mention, we don't hear about that because contractors have this fear of complaining to someone beyond the contract manager, that they are going to be put in a position of detriment on any future bid or proposal.
They fear biting the hand that feeds them.
Yeah, and at least in my 5.5 years of state experience, I have not seen that to be the case.
And I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't made the phone call myself and asked.
Right.
And it was due to a lack of response to the projects. But no, we don't normally hear about these things. We may hear, and I have heard situations in the past where contract managers will come to me, or a contract manager from the vendor will come to me directly as procurement officer and say, hey, your contract manager is being unreasonable. So I've had vendors come directly to the procurement officer to raise issues about our contract managers in the past. Those things have happened. I would bring parties together and I would negotiate and mediate a nice, happy settlement between the two. But a lot of these times we don't hear about. Thank you, sir. The right guy or right woman. You got to pick the right person. What are we at? 47. Any questions on that? Everybody okay? Contract manager exhibits competency, compassion, and a total commitment to the results to be obtained from the contract. The contractors may end up doing more than what is strictly required. You know, Joe, you're such a nice guy, and you've been such a nice guy to work with, and because today's today, I'm going to go ahead and throw in an extra dozen whatever. You go, Joe. Make sure you can accept it, Joe. Sometimes they'll give you a little extra. They might do a little more. You know, the carrot approach did work. They're not giving anything away for free, but they might help you out a little bit because of the relationship that you've established. And a lot of these long-term contracts, if you're dealing with these people for years and years and years, I mean, it can be like a marriage at times. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be, you know, there can be strained results, it's a relationship that needs to be developed. We all like to be part of an effort to do good. Just as many of us work for the state to do some good for our fellow citizens, some contractors may do more than just perform if they see the benefit they are providing and feel valued beyond just getting paid. I'll leave that at that. But let's not be naive. Let's not kid ourselves. I've been around this business a long time, right? Although the contents of the prior slide may occur, let's not expect it, and we should foster the conditions for it to occur, but not be disappointed if it doesn't, as long as they're doing everything they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it, okay? That's it. You know, you do your job, you get paid. No more, no less. We shouldn't expect any more than that, but we should expect that.
Just one comment. Sorry.
Can we get him a microphone? Get him his own microphone.
What Mark said and what Joel wrote is absolutely correct. But I've found that if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you have a vendor who's doing a great job and has pride in his work, he may not have thought that, gee, if I extend this to some other part of your agency at no additional cost, and it's not outside the scope of work that I'm performing, you know, maybe that would be a nice thing for me to do, and it might lead to some future contract work. So sometimes you have to give them a little bit of a suggestion as to how they can do a little bit more if it truly is something that could benefit the agency.
Well, but let's not be naive.
But let's not be.
Let's not be naive. They're sales folks at heart too, right? As long as they're getting the job done. But you're right, if sometimes you don't nudge them a little bit, you might not get anything. But let's fall into the friend trap. Let's just be friends. All right. It's like you got your contract manager on Facebook or something. He's your friend, right? The contract manager needs to be vigilant that he or she doesn't develop such a rapport with the contract personnel that they accept subpar performance without complaint or requiring them to fix it. It's okay if the contractor provides more than required because of this rapport, but it's not if they don't. It is not okay for the same reasons you would accept less than required. We're such good friends, we'll make it up next week, right? Next week rolls along, I'll take care of it in another couple of days. Don't worry about it, right? Let's not get too comfortable. You want to develop that relationship, but don't be taken advantage of, right? Come on, we're friends. We can get away with that. You wouldn't treat a friend that way, would you? You would too, I know you would. The other side to involvement. Aside from being involved with the procurement process to convey a positive image to the vendors, involvement of the contract manager allows them to get to know the vendor better so that the contract commencement process can run smoother, because the acquaintance period may already be over, and have a voice in the selection of the contractor they will manage. A lot of our contract managers who do this for a living know the market, and they pretty much know the vendors that they may or may not be dealing with. So a lot of times there is some sense of familiarity between our person on the ground and whoever the contractor is going to assign, because they understand who the players are in this particular market. And that's a good thing, providing it's a good relationship. Usually people feel better about their job if they have some say in how it's done. Again, you want the contractor involved in the process with the planning and the selection. They feel part of the selection. They didn't just get dumped in their lap. Having a say in the selection of the contractor for an evaluated procurement will provide extra incentive for the contract manager to ensure that the contract properly performs. I was recently on a procurement with the contract manager who was involved in the procurement process, and you can bet his best interests were at heart. At the end of the day, he knew the headaches he was going to have to face with a less than satisfactory contractor. So it was in his best interest to make sure that they got the right contractor to perform that job. He did have some extra incentive. He wasn't in the mood, he wasn't anticipating working with a less than satisfactory vendor. Allows a more in-depth understanding of the vendor, their personnel, and their capabilities, which may help during the contract performance. I would never recommend doing a request for proposals and doing an evaluated procurement without the contract manager being part of that evaluation committee, because of what this slide says. Okay? Am I pointing this way? What would you do? Contractor rapport example. This is in the early 1990s. This must be one of Joel's examples. Housekeeping facility contract. The vendor complained about unreasonable requirements of the facility contract manager. That mean old contract manager. They didn't file a claim. It just wanted this person to back off. Get him off my back. It doesn't quite raise to the standard of a formal complaint. We're going to file a claim against this person. I just want him to ease up a little bit. Get him off my back. And the vendor explained its predicament. Do we know what the predicament was? Or is that on the next slide? Ah, the predicament. When the vendor bid on the contract, cleaning the school building wasn't in the specifications. So what's that mean? It sounds like something changed, right? Maybe. The local school board provided a person to help maintain the school building. This person did the cleaning of the school building. The local school board still had the responsibility to teach the kids even though they were in a facility. Okay? So cleaning the school building wasn't in the specifications, and the local school board had somebody doing it. However, here's the change. Due to funding and staff cutbacks, the facility started using the school-provided person who was doing the cleaning. Well, now we're going to have him doing some other things. These were functions that were being performed by other state personnel. So suddenly he doesn't have time to clean the building. because we got them doing other things that are more important. So, besides, we have a vendor who could clean the building. So we'll just tell them to clean the building. This says they ask them to clean the building. Bless you. However, the facility said it couldn't pay any more money than the contract allowed because of our deficits and budget crunch. So what, in essence, have we told them to do, asked them to do?
Something beyond the scope.
Something beyond the scope. Something for nothing, that's what I'm hearing, right? Isn't that what you
Exactly right.
Hey, look, this wasn't part of the deal, but I want you to do it. But I don't have any more money for it. Does that sound like what's going on here? Where are we? They expected the vendor to clean the school because the school needed to be cleaned. And that's what the contractor did. He was a cleaning contractor. It's dirty, clean it. You're a cleaning contractor. That makes sense to me. So the vendor said, all right, I'll clean it. And he did it for a couple months. And at some point in time, he just said, hey, look, I can't afford to pay for this cleaning. You're not paying me for it. It's costing me money. I can no longer afford this. Okay, so at some point, he just said, look, this isn't working out anymore. This is costing me too much money. And the money he was making on his contract obviously wasn't enough to cover this cost or expense. When asked why it had just complained about this, why did this come up now? You've been doing this for how long? Several months? The vendor said, well, I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to make you happy. I wanted to help out because I understand, you guys are broke. I figured by doing so, I could get a good reference. Maybe help me out with some other work. I'm just a small business. I'm just trying to start up here. I'm trying to do the right thing. But you guys are costing me money. I can no longer afford this. Okay? I mean, that's all honorable things, right? I don't know if I'd have done it, but that seems like he thought he was doing the right thing. He or she thought they were doing the right thing. And I suppose they were, until they realized they were losing money doing so. So what did the state say? I had no choice. She had no choice. I had no choice. It had to be cleaned. I got no one to clean it. I got no money to clean it. So what do we do? What would you do? Sir?
First time he made the statement that it wasn't in the specs, I would have told him to put it in writing. And then I would have walked it up to command.
All right, so there would have been some sort of a formal amendment or modification to the requirements.
Right, formal request that he's
I-
not going to do it per the specs.
That he was or wasn't going to do it. Which one?
Well, in this case, obviously, he's taking the position that it's not in the specs. So he's saying, I don't want to do it because it's not in the specs.
But it's got to be cleaned.
They're making
That's what you do. It's a school. You got to clean it. What were you going to say? What'd you do? You were a contract manager before. What would you do?
Well, it's not in the contract. You can negotiate with the contractor to see if you put it in, but if you have the money, you can't pay for it.
Do you hear what he said? Basically, he said, you could work with the contractor and amend your contract and have them incorporate this extra cleaning into the contract. But he said, I don't have any money. Well, I can't pay for it anyway. I mean, going through the official process of amending the contract is great, but the contractor's still in a position where I can't afford to do this out of the kindness of my heart. So, what do we do? Let's find out. Hopefully we'll find out when we turn the page. And the answer is, survey says, Bing, the vendor was thanked for its extra efforts and told it didn't have to clean the school. My perspective on that is that's probably the only position the state could have taken at the end of the day. Because the contractor simply could have said, it's not in the specifications, therefore I am not required to do this. And I'm willing to do this, but if you're not willing to compensate me for doing this, then I'm not going to do this. In that case, I'll say, thank you very much. I appreciated the 3 months that you've kept my building clean. Okay? The problems of the facility should not have been transferred to the vendor. It had to have been clean. I got to clean it. That's my problem. That's not necessarily the vendor's problem. If more area was to be cleaned and the vendor wouldn't continue to do the cleaning voluntarily, it needed to be paid. I think they're willing to do so. If we'd only ponied up a few dollars, right? At least that's the way the story reads. If more money wasn't available, the contractor only had to clean what it originally contracted to do. Okay? I think that we shouldn't expect them to do any more than what they're obligated to do. It's nice if they can help us out. This situation, it seemed like these things happened. There seemed to be some sort of a change, and the contractor said, hey, I can help you out. I wonder if the contractor knew that we didn't have any money at the end of the day when he decided to help us out. Hopefully somebody didn't say, hey, help us out and we'll try to make it up in the long run. I mean, that wouldn't have been right, you know. But I think this is the only approach we could have taken at the end of the day. And at that, we will manage ourselves to take a break.